All right, guys, we're gonna roll to a start here tonight. I want to thank you all for coming. This will be our last week with Titus, and we'll be on to something else. Now, next Wednesday we're not meeting, so we're not having because it's the night before. It's Thanksgiving Eve next Wednesday, so we won't be here, but we'll be back for some Advent stuff in the weeks following that. So we'll talk a little bit about that starting next time. But just want you to know we won't be here next week. So. Tonight we're going to unveil a new a feature for our class together. Dr. Nutt and I got together Monday, I think it was, and we were talking about some things, and there was some feedback of we'd like to actually go back and discuss the previous week, now that you've heard the sermon on Sunday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to ask questions. So any feedback from Sunday, reflection from Sunday, anything you want to bring up from Sunday last week? If you remember, we were talking about being a good example and displaying wholesome teaching, how important it is to give evidence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We're talking about that. Do that by the way that we live and how we conduct ourselves, things like that. That was the conversation, if you shall recall, all the way back. So I ask you, feedback? Questions? They're here filming today. Don't clam up on me now. So, yeah. Nothing? Nothing good? I completely covered the topic 100% all the way? All right. I'm going to give you this opportunity every Wednesday. I'll tell you what, I'll even open it up. Anything else from world events, anything you want to pick my brain on, whatever. I'll give you a chance to have one free shot at me at the beginning of every class. So did that prompt anything? You don't care what I think? That's fine too. So all right, we're gonna need some energy from you guys here tonight. All right, so let's go ahead. We're gonna finish Titus chapter 3, and we're just gonna do a couple of verses because what I'm going to talk about for the first part, and then Dr. Nutt's going to give you a good example of why we want to make sure we do this. And he's got a story that I'm actually curious if many of you have even heard before. I mean, some of you have, but it's kind of like Stephen. He's got a pretty obscure story from the book of Acts that we're going to look at, and I think you'll enjoy that as well. So what we want to talk about here tonight is, you know what? Slow clap for Jody right now, everybody. Let's do this. Yeah, all right. Yeah. I thought the chili was spicy. That's what I thought that was. So, yeah. All right. Good deal. So, tonight we're going to talk about building community because that's what Titus happens to come up with. And I think that there's a lot to be said for the fact that, and I'm not indicting anybody here, but we as a culture are terrible at this. As a culture, we are awful at building community. And I don't mean Wayne Street. I mean Americans in general. Every community I have lived in has just been awful at doing this. And I think the reason for that is because we're also very disconnected anymore. We don't know what communication means. We have no idea. Because, and especially if we went to the people who are on that end of the building, they're losing the ability to talk to somebody's face. And so because what we're doing is we talk with our thumbs, and I think what that's doing is it's actually driving a wedge between us because we have neglected to remember something very, very important. There is a chasm of difference between disseminating information and communicating. They are not the same thing. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I'll use Susan's example because she and I text a lot, as you can imagine. She could text me, hey, on your way home, stop and pick up a gallon of milk. Easy. I get it. Run to Kroger, go get a gallon of milk. That's disseminating information. However, if there's something like personal that she wants to communicate with me, she can't do that over text. She can say it, but she can't communicate it. All right? If she wanted to, if I'm having a bad day and she wanted to say something encouraging, she could text me. Usually what happens, she texts me a meme because we send a lot of memes back and forth. But and that might make me laugh or something like that. But that's not communication. That's not looking somebody in the eye and talking to them. And we are awful at that anymore. And I'll tell you, and I know I promise I'm not going to keep harping on this, but this became very apparent to me at the city council meeting, at the last one I went to. You know, it had a lot of people doing a lot of talking, but there wasn't a whole lot of communicating happening with certain individuals who were there, because everybody was fired up and whatever, but nobody was listening to anybody. Everybody had something they wanted to say, but nobody had anything they wanted to hear. And you can't build community like that. And we're going to see that illustrated very clearly here, and we're going to see it illustrated even more clearly in what Dr. Nutt's going to share with us here in a few minutes. Because we are so fixated, we are so focused on our own experience. Here's how I feel. Here's how I see it. Here's my perspective. And I'm not discounting that. That's important, but that's not it. That's not the end of the story. Okay? We have to be able, or at least willing, to identify that somebody else might feel something. And they might be wrong. They might be right, but it's going to be different from you. And if we don't make the effort to at least identify that there may be a different way for this to happen, or a different way for us to perceive it, you're not going to be able to build community that way. And we're going to see that very, very clearly. Because remember, where Titus was serving, just a quick review, he was on the island of Crete, a little island on the far reaches of the Roman Empire. The Romans were there, and the people there, including Titus, hated them, just like everybody did. But in this place, in the midst of this high pressure situation that he was serving in, trying to build a Christian community in a place where they weren't 100% welcome. And it wasn't like everybody was like, "Oh, we're so glad you're here." That's not how it was happening. People were being converted in their faith, and they were growing in their walk with Jesus. And a lot of people were happy about it, but a lot of other people were not. So in the midst of this very controversial place, Titus was left there as the leader of this community to try to draw them together, which is why Paul has spent so much time saying, look, so very important. I mean, look at the things on this list. That's how you can tell the difference between a believer and a non-believer. You're going to see these certain traits. If you see those traits, make sure you understand who you're dealing with. Don't think everybody's seeing things like you. Don't think everybody's going to be converted the same way you are. Don't think everybody's going to agree with you all the time, because probably they're not. And the reason that was so important is because Paul knew in this far-flung, way out there place on this island that if they were able to build community and work together and have each other's backs and trust each other, this was never going to work. The church that was going to be built there was never going to go anywhere, because all they were ever going to do was fight either with each other or fight with everybody else. And so we've talked about leadership, we've talked about community, we've talked about wholesome teaching, we've talked about giving evidence, living the evidence, helping people see what you believe to be true based on the way that you act. I mean, have you ever heard the expression, "What you're doing speaks so loud I can't hear what you're saying"? That's what Paul's telling these guys. You ain't doing the stuff. What you say is really irrelevant. You have to be able to prove it by the way that you're acting. And that's what he wanted to get people to see. So that's what he's pounding on people. And he's going to give some last second advice here in this. And actually, this section that we're reading is the end of the book. So this is the last, 6 verses we're going to look at. We're going to start in chapter 3, verse 9. So after he's had all this discussion about evidence and wholesome teaching and looking for leadership and choosing good people and getting all this stuff together, after all this time, here's how he's going to finish. Let me start here with verse 9. And I'm just going to read this first little phrase, and then we're going to pick this apart. Do not get involved in foolish discussions. Ever been involved in a foolish discussion? Anybody? Yeah, not in the last 10 minutes, right? Yeah. Yes, we've all been involved in a foolish discussion. So he says, don't get involved in foolish discussion about spiritual pedigrees or in quarrels and fights about obedience to Jewish laws. These things are useless and a waste of time. I remind you, we studied the guy who wrote this. Our very first sermon series was on a guy named Stephen. And we talked about the guy who was holding the coats at Stephen's execution. It was a guy named Saul. That's the guy that wrote this. The guy who said, yes, let's stone the guy overseeing the food pantry. Let's kill that guy. Let's kill him by throwing stones at him till he's dead. That guy wrote this. So the first thing I use that to say is, this guy experienced a tremendous conversion. That's a pretty wide way of looking at this, where he was the one willing to say, I'll hold y'all coats so the food pantry operator, your blood don't get on you. To go from that to saying arguments and quarrels and fights about obedience to Jewish laws is useless and a waste of time. You hear that? That's a pretty big statement for a guy who killed somebody over obedience to Jewish laws. But that's who we're dealing with. So if anybody on the face of the planet had a clear understanding of the, what's the word I want? Fervent observation of Jewish law, it was the Apostle Paul. Because I'm going to tell you right now, for as long as that guy was a Christian, for however many years, because I don't know exactly how long it was, but however long in his life he was a Christian, from the time he was converted until he was executed, however many years that was, he spent more time than that adhering to Jewish laws. So for him to turn around and say, what I spent the first at least half of my life doing is useless. Again, I'm giving this to you to help you understand what a moment that Damascus Road must have been to him. He got knocked down by a light and spoke to by a voice with no face that said, I am Jesus. And that moment said, the first half of my life was a waste of time. It's a pretty significant step. So let's not miss that. Now, so he understood how aggressive these fights had been. Because remember, he was at one of these arguments where somebody ended up having stones thrown at him until he was dead. So he understands how much these can do. And he wants them to understand how far this can take you. Now, second thing here. I want to make sure that we're clear on what kind of things we're talking about. And I'll give you a couple of examples. First thing, suppose sitting here tonight, somebody came in here and they wanted to convince me, you decided you wanted to have a conversation with me about who would win in a fight, Batman or Superman. Now, I have a very clear and correct opinion on this, all right? And I'm going to fervently fight on it. But at the end of the day, I don't really care. I'm not trying to change your mind, okay? If you want to, I mean, if you either think Batman's going to win or you could be wrong. It doesn't matter to me, okay? But but that's where it's going to be. However, if you decided you wanted to come in here tonight and I said, hey, tonight we're going to open our meeting, I'm going to let you ask me anything you want. And somebody we'll say Lynn Persinger decides to raise his hand and says, yeah, I've been doing some reading and some stuff, and I don't know about this resurrection of Jesus thing. I think that's false. Lynn had better wear his big boy pants tonight because he's going to be in for it, because I'm not budging an inch on that one. Okay? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I use Lynn's example because I know there's no way he would ever say that. But that's the idea. If you're that is a petty discussion. That is foolish discussion, as he calls it here. Because the Batman versus Superman thing, honestly, who cares? But there are some fundamental arguments that people want to have out there that absolutely do matter. Somebody come in here and say, hey, I think abortion is a woman's right. If she wants to do it, it's she gets control over her body. Well, we're going to have a conversation about that because I don't agree. Because there's another body involved in this discussion. Okay? That's the kind of thing we're talking about. So people could come in here and there's some things that we can have fun arguing about, Ohio State or Indiana this weekend. We can have a conversation about that. I know there's one side I better come down on if I want to maintain my job, but that's how that works. Okay? And but the idea is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But when you get down to fundamental stuff that does matter, and you've got somebody who is opposed to what has been presented as the truth, and they only want to continue to fight about it, that can cause problems. I mean, suppose every Wednesday night we would come in here and somebody would decide all they want to do is argue with me about everything I say. Now, the first week, y'all would probably be entertained by that. And the second week, you'd probably be entertained by that. By the third week, though, you're thinking, this is getting old. Okay? I'm tired of watching Tim almost have a stroke in the middle of this thing, okay? You're going to get tired. It's going to start driving people away because you're like, look, you guys are never going to agree. You're going to have to agree to disagree. But if you've got somebody who has something they won't let go, well, you're going to have to address that. And I mean, and I'll say this, nobody in this room, but there are people around churches I've served who have issues that I had a fundamental disagreement with, and they wouldn't let it go. And they would want to come in and argue about stuff and all kinds of things. I get some feedback from some of the stuff, the articles I put in the newspaper. I get some stuff. People want to write me anonymous letters, which is really brave. I just want to tell you how impressed I am with that. But the idea is you're trying to convince me of something, and I'll tell you right now, probably not going to work, especially if it's an anonymous letter. And because, you know, there are certain things you can change my mind on, plenty of things. But there are some things you're not. And if you get the proverbial, you know, immovable force that keeps crashing into the immovable object, eventually something's going to have to give. We're going to have to agree to disagree. And if your being here is going to do nothing but you fighting with me, we're not getting anywhere. We're not building community at that point. We're probably building hatred for each other, and we're not helping anybody. That's why Paul is saying, look, I understand some of you have some really strong feelings about this. Trust me, I understand strong feelings about this stuff. Remember, I killed a guy once over this. So he says, I firmly and completely and totally understand where you're coming from. What I'm telling you is, you're going to have to agree to disagree. There's going to have to be some fundamental truths, some fundamental principles, some fundamental core values that you're going to have to agree on and say, look, some of this other stuff we're going to have to let go. And if you can't do that, you can't facilitate community. In fact, a lot of people couldn't even facilitate their family without some kind of disagreement. And this is probably a good lesson for us to have the week before Thanksgiving, right? Anybody got to see that family member that you always fight with and stuff? So that's going to happen. And what Paul is saying is, you can get so bogged down in the details that you miss the point. And you guys have all met people somewhere along the way, whether it be a religious issue or something at your job or something in your family, or you've been a part of a sports team or something, where somebody gets so bogged down on some piece of the information or some piece of something that they miss the point of the whole thing, the whole thing completely. And Paul is saying, I don't want that for you. If you're really going to build this Christian community out there on the island of Crete, out there on the far fringes, you know, way out there somewhere in the water, and you're going to have this community and you're going to make it work, you're going to have to realize that you're going to have to say, okay, here's what we agree on. And then we got this guy who doesn't like this part, but we like him anyways. But if it's an issue you can't get to that over, then you're going to have to decide something. And what are you going to decide? Let's continue reading. Verse 10. If people are causing divisions among you, give a first and a second warning. After that, have nothing to do with them. Anybody want to say, wow, Pastor Tim, that sounds a little harsh? Anybody want to go there? 2 warnings? Why does he do this? All right. See, look, we're coming to an understanding back there. Good job, guys. I guess Dale's on his 1 3/4 warning at this point. So, all right. I said, but he's at 1 3/4. So just so you know, yeah. All right. Anybody think it sound harsh? No wrong answer. I'm just asking. What do you think? Two and out seems harsh. Why do you think he said that? Because here's the thing. If you and somebody significant in your life, particularly your spouse, have fought more than 2 times over any issue, which is all of you, let's not kid ourselves. I'm telling you right now, I don't want you to go home and say, well, Pastor Tim says we're done. I don't want anybody to say that, all right? Okay? But what I'm saying is I'm not talking about discussions. I'm not talking about conversations. I'm talking about I'm driving my stick here. I'm staking my claim here, and I'm not budging. Those kinds of issues. Okay? A lot of you are smiling at each other, and I want you to know that warms my heart at this moment. Thank you for doing that. But what we're saying here is we're talking about building a community, not necessarily building a family. So these are people that we're going to serve together. It doesn't mean we're going to live together. So we're talking 2 different things here. So I don't want anybody file for divorce later this week because Pastor Tim told you to. What I want you to do is I want you to see we're building a bigger community than just the 2 of you. And so if we're going to build a community like this one that we have here, there's a certain number of understandings that we're going to have. And what happens often when I say we are awful, we are terrible at building community, because we are. The reason is because not because this is harsh. Let me tell you what normally happens. Normally, when there's an argument of this caliber, and I'm not talking about, Bengals or Browns kind of fights. I'm talking about a real knockdown, drag out kind of fight. There's no warning. Somebody's just out. Okay? That's usually how it happens. So as I first look at this and say, 2 warnings seems a little severe, so I realize almost every time in my 25 years of serving in churches here and other places, there's usually no warning. There's a knockdown, drag out, and somebody doesn't come back. That's usually how it goes. And so I'm saying this standard is actually better, is actually more merciful than the one that we use. And you really, really build a community when you've been through the first warning. Is that not true? A group of people find out what they're made of when we have our first, because look, it's easy, like here tonight. You all are agreeing to let me talk for another, looks like about 9 minutes. You all have agreed to that. All right? And we're all, I hope, having a good time. I hope you're learning something. I hope you're learning about Titus. I hope the sermon Sunday connects with you a little better, because we've done a little work with it here tonight. I hope all that. And I'm sure you're here tonight because you hope that too. But we are not building a community until something happens. Like, let's say, God forbid, there would be something weird happen. We'd be sitting here and I don't know, water started flowing in the door and started flooding the building. We had to evacuate all the kids out of the basement, get them out of there before the water filled it up. If we would go through an experience like that, we would be bonded in a way that this experience here is never going to do for us. So what I'm telling you is, the reason Paul says give a warning and a second warning is because we don't do that. We just walk away. We say, heck with this. And the conversation of how can we come together never happens. There's never a moment of, I don't want to say compromise, because all compromise means is nobody gets what they want. What I'm saying is, there's never been a conversation about how can you and I get through our differences. Because every time, I'll speak for me, every time I've been through that with a person or an organization, when we can have that conversation about our differences, we come out better on the other side. Have you seen that? So because you've come through something together, you've had an experience. So what I hear Paul saying here is not 2 strikes and you're out. I'm hearing him say, don't ever oust somebody without the first warning. Don't let somebody go that easy. If they've come and there's a legitimate issue, something that we are gonna bump heads over to the point that we're considering cutting ties, don't let that person go till that first warning conversation happens, even if they're trying to run. See, it's a little different if you look at it that way. The 2 strikes and you're out thing is how we usually look at it. It's a little tough. But to say, no, this is Paul saying, at least try. Because community is so important. Don't let it walk out the door without at least trying to fight for it. And I don't mean fight them for it. I mean fight for the connection itself. And all too often, we just say, sayonara, and I hope you don't come back, is often how that goes. All right.
Sometimes you get opinion gets out there.
Sure.
And then somebody else has different opinions, but they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that happens too.
That's a bad thing, because then there's no conversation.
Absolutely. The growth that could come from that is never allowed to happen, and that's a shame. Because connection is important. And again, that's why I say we're terrible at it, because we give it up on the first bump in the road. We just say, we go find a different church, or we go find a different friend, or we go find a different whatever. And I think that I'm not saying there never comes a time when a change like that. I'm obviously not saying that as somebody who's attended 5 churches in my life, but as somebody who just led a church that disaffiliated from a denomination, I can tell you there's a time you got to walk away, but not after conversation. Not before conversation. Sorry, conversation has to happen. Negotiation has to happen, because the connection of a community is too important to just let it go on the first bump in the road. That goes for churches, it goes for organization, it goes for teams, it goes for families, it goes for all that stuff. Don't just let it go. Okay, verse 11. For people like that have turned away from the truth and their own sins condemn them. Why? Because they said the connection in the body of Christ is not worth fighting for and they walked away from it. That's the problem. And that's why people walking away from organizations, before they even give the organization a chance and give the people in the organization a chance, they just let all that stuff go, drop it on the floor, and walk away from it. That's something that we should not do. Again, I'm not saying there's never a time that the change doesn't need to happen. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is it's probably not within the first 5 minutes of a conflict either. All right. Now, so what kind of an organization is this church on the island of Crete? How what does Paul think of it? Well, here's what Paul thinks of it. Verse 12. I am planning to send either Artemis or Tychicus to you. As soon as one of them arrives, do your best to meet me at Nicopolis, for I've decided to stay there for the winter. Now, I did a little bit of checking. Artemis, this is the only time his name's ever dropped. I know nothing about him. Tychicus actually gets name dropped a couple other places. He's mentioned in the book of Acts, and Paul names him in Colossians and 2 Timothy as being a worker that's with him. So Tychicus, and I know I'm not saying it right because the ch sound does not exist in Greek, so I don't know how to say it without the ch, but that's how it is. So whoever this Tychicus guy is, he's somebody that Paul knew very well. If this church was a toxic place and was falling apart and everybody was fighting, would you send your friend there? Probably not. Okay? And would you say, and okay, not only would you send your friend there, the very next thing he says is, hey, I want you to come meet me at Nicopolis. Would you say, I'd like to see you again if this is a place where a lot of fighting goes on? Again, probably not. All right. Verse 13. Do everything you can to help Zenos, the lawyer, and Apollos with their trip. Okay, I looked them up. Zenos, whoever he is, I have no idea. He's the only place he's named. But Apollos actually shows up quite often. He's a very frequent character in the second half of the book of Acts. He's also mentioned pretty prominently in the first letter to the Corinthians. Again, people that he knows. Again, whoever Zenos is and whoever Apollos, whoever these two guys are, would you say, I would like this toxic group of people to help you? No. So obviously, if they're got their feet on the ground enough to be able to help somebody, he obviously thinks about them quite a lot. See, they're given every help that they need. And all right, this next verse, I at least need you to act like this sounds familiar because it should. Our people must learn to do good by meeting the urgent needs of others. Then they will not be unproductive. That was our verse of the month. So the kids have been working on that one. Again, any of you who've ever been in charge of more than 4 people, you know this. The most happy people are busy people. If you give people idle hands, they'll find a way to fight with each other to entertain themselves. Anybody who've ever been in charge of people, you already know that. And so what he's saying is, look, if you're having problems building community, do projects together. Do things together. Build some community. Build some friendships. Because unproductive people are usually unhappy people. Verse 15. Everybody here sends greetings. Please give my greetings to believers, all who love us. May God's grace be with you all. All right. Just a few notes about that before I turn this over to Dr. Nutt. All who love us. If you know anything about the Greek language, and I've said this a few times on Sunday mornings, one thing about Greek that's very interesting is they have like multiple words for love. Where in English, we have one word for love. So, I love God. I love Susan. I love the Beatle. I love my house. I love Twinkies. The same word means all that. Okay? I mean, I'm not going to say where you are with Twinkies, dear, but that's, yeah, right. But that's where it's at. So in all this stuff, we use the same word to express all those different emotions. In Greek, all those words would be different. So the word that is here is phileo. I did not say that right, but you guys don't trust me on that one. Yeah. But that word means friendship. Okay? It's the kind of love that friendships or comrades have for each other. People who are in close, like teammate would be the idea. somebody who's got each other's back, somebody who there's trust relationship, but it's a friendship. It's a platonic kind of thing. They say all who see us as brothers, tell them to I said hey or something like that. But he's greeting all those people again. Not necessarily something you write to a bunch of people who want to do nothing but fight with each other all the time, but that's what he's expressing to them. So, community, don't give it up without a fight. That's what I want you to take from tonight, and we will come back at that with a vengeance on Sunday. Questions about any of that? Did I convince you? No, yeah. Everybody's like, I don't know. I still kind of like that 2 warning thing. So I know. I said other stuff. You can go back and watch it online if you need to, Dale. Yeah. All right. If not anything else, Dr. Nutt's going to take over the second half here. He's got a story from the Book of Acts. I'm going to be curious if any of you have ever heard before. So.